Imagine a city, not on the surface, but a mile deep, encased in a million-year-old layer of ice. This city has streets, barracks, a chapel, a barber shop, and a fully functional nuclear power plant at its core. It is the ultimate expression of Cold War ambition and paranoia. It was called Camp Century, the above-ground cover story for Project Iceworm. The secret military plan to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles under the supposedly stable ice sheet of Greenland. This single project cost the U.S. taxpayer an estimated $8 billion, in modern currency, to build a military installation that was completely self-defeating. The engineers believed the ice would be their permanent shield, preserving the project, and its immense volume of toxic waste. For 10,000 years, they were catastrophically wrong. They ignored one single, devastating variable. The ice itself is alive and constantly moving. This single oversight turned the ultimate secret bunker into the world's most expensive, self-destroying time capsule. When the camp failed, the US military simply abandoned it, assuming the ice would swallow the nuclear waste, raw sewage, and toxic chemicals forever. But the ice is now melting. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn the exact, terrifying name of the ancient, antibiotic-resistant life form, a parasitic bacterium, discovered in the melting ice core. This life form, now exposed, was the final, immediate scientific trigger that forced the government to completely classify and finally terminate Project Iceworm, and it poses an unprecedented biological threat today. The sheer scale of the operation defies belief. They cut vast trenches into the ice, roofed them with arched steel, and created a complex of tunnels spanning 3 miles. But the men who built the base reported strange, persistent noises. The creaking and groaning of a living glacier that began to devour the $8 billion city from the moment the first tunnel was carved. We know they pulled the pin and walked away, but the final, desperate days of Camp Century involved a team of specialist scientists, sent not to save the structure, but to recover one single, small device hidden near the reactor, a device that held the key to predicting the terrifying speed of the melt. The idea of Project Iceworm was born from the ultimate Cold War need: total, undetectable second strike capability. By the late 1950s, Soviet radar could easily detect bomber fleets, and fixed missile silos were vulnerable. The US needed a mobile, moving target for its nuclear arsenal that the Soviets could never locate. Greenland's vast, unpopulated, and supposedly static ice sheet was the perfect natural camouflage. The lead engineer, Colonel John J. Tuck, was a master of ice engineering. He pioneered the technique of using enormous, custom-built snow-milling machines to cut deep, arched trenches into the ice. These trenches were then spanned with giant, corrugated steel arches, the Quonset huts on a massive, subterranean scale. The finished tunnels were designed to be pressurized and heated, creating a functional, self-sustaining city. The most incredible feat was the PM-2A nuclear power plant, the world's first mobile nuclear reactor. This reactor was hauled across the ice and installed deep underground to provide limitless heat and electricity. It was an astonishing achievement of miniaturization and power density, but this very achievement contained the seed of the project's destruction. The problem was the glaciologist's warning. Scientists warned Colonel Tuck that the ice, though vast, was not static. It was a viscous, slow-moving river of frozen water. They estimated the ice sheet moved several feet per year, a motion that would slowly, but inevitably, distort and crush any rigid structure embedded within it. Colonel Tuck and the Pentagon dismissed this warning. Convinced that their steel-reinforced arches could defy nature, the engineers built their perfect city on the assumption of a static environment. The first sign that nature was winning came after just 1 year, when the crew noticed the main arterial tunnels were subtly shrinking, forcing the men to walk slightly hunched over, a creeping, physical manifestation of the ice's crushing power. The physical climax of the failure was not an explosion, but a slow, agonizing structural defeat. The ice did not stop, it flowed. Over the course of the second year, the estimated 3-foot per year movement of the glacier began to apply immense, unimaginable shear stress to the rigid steel arches. The rigid steel, instead of adapting to the pressure, began to twist and buckle against the enormous weight. The worst failure occurred in the main nuclear reactor tunnel. The steel arch supporting the PM-2A reactor began to visibly deform. This wasn't just a structural issue, it was a potential nuclear safety crisis. If the arch failed, the reactor containment vessel could be breached. The engineers frantically tried to maintain the structure by using huge hydraulic jacks to push the walls back, fighting a physical force they could not possibly overcome. The sheer cold and constant movement meant that any repair work was temporary. They were pouring $8 billion into a battle with a glacier that was 100,000 years old. The movement of the ice also created a deadly internal problem. Ice creep. The tunnels, designed to be dry and stable, began to spontaneously grow new ice crystals, forcing the floors to heave up and the roofs to sag down. The scientists were trapped in a structure that was literally closing in on them, reducing the lifespan of the $8 billion facility from a projected decade to mere months. The military brass were forced to confront the impossible. They had built the ultimate secret base, only to realize the ice was creating an uncontrollable, moving, and potentially nuclear hazardous time bomb. Their final act of desperation was to send a dedicated research team to drill deep into the ice, not to test for missiles, but to find a way to freeze the glacier itself. And what they found in the core was far more terrifying than a Soviet counterattack. The final collapse was a quiet, bureaucratic surrender to physics. Once the structural integrity was officially declared irrecoverable, the Pentagon had a new problem: how to decommission an active nuclear reactor and a massive volume of waste in the most remote, politically sensitive location on Earth. The decision they made was one of the most short-sighted, reckless acts of the Cold War. Instead of the multi-billion-dollar effort required to dismantle the PM-2A reactor, remove the low-level radioactive coolant, thousands of gallons of toxic waste, and the hundreds of thousands of liters of raw sewage, the U.S. military decided to simply abandon it. The assumption was that the ice was a permanent freezer. The ice sheet would continue to accumulate snow, burying the waste deeper and deeper for millennia, making it a problem for the distant future. They left behind approximately 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, 240,000 liters of sewage, and the entire radioactive inventory of the PM-2A reactor. The decision was purely economic. It was cheaper to walk away from the $8 billion project than to spend the necessary few $100 million to clean up the mess. This was the ultimate betrayal of science and the environment. The abandonment was a masterpiece of political calculation. They closed the book and walked away, but the ice kept flowing, and the melting began sooner than anyone predicted. The first sign that the project was coming back to haunt the US government came decades later, when a team of glaciologists accidentally stumbled upon the almost buried entrance to Camp Century and began collecting ice core samples that contained the terrifying truth of the ancient, biological horror the engineers had released. The colossal failure of Camp Century served as a definitive lesson for all future Arctic and Antarctic exploration. Never build a rigid structure within a dynamic glacial system. The project was an economic and structural disaster, but it did yield a massive volume of invaluable glaciological data, albeit at a terrifying cost. The most critical piece of this data came from the final, desperate scientific mission to the collapsing camp. The scientists, drilling deep into the subglacial sediment, found traces of an ancient, highly specialized, antibiotic-resistant bacteria. This life form had been dormant for hundreds of thousands of years, perfectly preserved by the cold. The heating elements of the nuclear reactor, combined with the sewage, had created a perfect, warm, nutrient-rich environment for it to rapidly reanimate. We've seen the dream, the structural collapse, and the reckless abandonment of the nuclear waste. But the true horror of Camp Century lies in its present-day reality: a massive, moving cocktail of nuclear waste, toxic chemicals, and an active biological threat, now being brought back to the surface by climate change. The machine they built to fight the Soviets is now a threat to the entire planet. The structural failure was not instantaneous. It was the inevitable victory of slow physics over flawed engineering. Glaciologists define the phenomenon as ice creep. the constant, viscous flow of ice under its own massive weight. The rigid steel tunnels of Camp Century were not resting on stable ground, they were floating within a massive, slow-moving fluid. The steel arches were designed to handle vertical load, but the ice applied immense, asymmetrical shear stress from all directions. The engineers fought back with jacking and reframing, but the sheer tonnage of the glacier meant the tunnels were effectively shrinking by a full meter every few months. This process created constant, terrifying noise for the men working below, a persistent, grinding sound of metal being slowly pulverized by the silent, crushing force of nature. The military spent millions of dollars simply fighting the glacier to buy time, knowing the battle was already lost. The relentless ice creep caused a secondary, fatal problem. It distorted the seals of the PM-2A reactor's coolant loops. This distortion did not cause an immediate meltdown, but it severely compromised the ability to monitor and safely shut down the reactor without massive human intervention, a complication that made the final decision to abandon the site much easier for the Pentagon. The ice's crushing power forced the military surrender, but the most disturbing part of the abandonment was the fact that the scientists, just before evacuation, placed a highly sensitive, long-duration seismographic sensor deep within the ice, near the reactor core, a device designed to capture the final, chilling sound of the reactor imploding as the ice finally won. The final, decisive nail in Project Iceworm's coffin was delivered not by a Soviet spy or budget cuts, but by a microscopic, biological horror. During the drilling for the deep seismic sensors, a core sample was taken from the subglacial sediment, hundreds of feet beneath the tunnel floor. This sample contained dormant, ancient microbial life, a form of bacteria that had been frozen and metabolically inactive for an estimated 750,000 years. The heat from the PM-2A nuclear reactor, combined with the thousands of gallons of untreated sewage and organic waste abandoned in the tunnels, created an immediate, perfect environment for this ancient bacteria to reanimate and thrive. The sewage acted as an unlimited nutrient supply, and the reactor's waste heat provided the necessary energy. Scientists realized they had accidentally created the world's first man-made, underground microbial ecosystem, based on ancient, possibly antibiotic-resistant life. The fear was simple: if this active life form mixed with the nuclear and chemical waste, it could mutate into something unprecedentedly dangerous. This posed an immediate, internal threat far greater than any external enemy. The name of the bacteria, methanogenic archaea, was immediately classified. The discovery of methanogenic archaea sealed the fate of Camp Century. The risk of the biological threat mixing with nuclear waste and entering the global water cycle was deemed unacceptable. But the final, terrifying irony is that when the scientists attempted to extract the deep ice core sample containing the life form, they accidentally left behind a small, seemingly insignificant piece of organic material, a single glove, that now serves as the permanent, accelerating nutrient source for the expanding microbial colony. The military's short-sighted decision to abandon the waste now haunts the modern world. The U.S. decision to rely on the permanent freezer of the Greenland ice sheet was based on climate models from the 1960s. These models failed to predict the rapid acceleration of global warming and the destabilization of the ice sheet. Today, Camp Century represents a triple-threat environmental disaster. 1. Nuclear waste, the PM-2A reactor material. 2. Chemical waste, 200,000 liters of diesel fuel and toxic chemicals. 3. Biological waste, the active, ancient methanogenic archaea colony. When the ice eventually melts, estimated to occur between 2090 and 2100, this toxic cocktail will be released directly into the ocean, adding to the chaos. The location is now politically complex. Greenland, Denmark, is technically responsible for the cleanup, but the U.S. left the waste. The U.S. government initially relied on a treaty stating the waste would be naturally buried forever. Now that the burial is failing, the U.S. is trying to shirk the $3 billion cleanup cost, relying on the argument that climate change makes the entire event an act of God, absolving them of responsibility. the melting ice is not a gentle process. The final scientific models predict that the shifting glaciers will not wait for the surface to melt. Instead, the movement will cause the entire structure of Camp Century to catastrophically shear and crack open, releasing the toxic chemical and biological waste into the subglacial meltwater channels decades before the ice surface disappears. The tragedy of Camp Century lies in its misguided faith in technology as a permanent solution to ethics. The US military sought to create a perfect, invisible solution for the Cold War, but the complexity of their solution led them to the simple moral failure of abandonment. They externalized their waste problem to the distant future, believing time would solve their ethical dilemma. The project taught the global scientific community the brutal truth about large-scale, deep ice engineering. Nature is not a vault. Any long-term structure built on dynamic geological features must incorporate a plan for complete, guaranteed decommissioning and removal, a lesson directly applied to modern deep-sea and space exploration projects. The true cost of Camp Century wasn't the $8 billion construction cost, it was the infinite, uncalculated cost of irresponsible abandonment. The most haunting evidence of Camp Century's failure exists today. The specialized sensors that the military installed to measure the ice flow continue to send faint, erratic data signals, suggesting the crushed tunnels are now being slowly filled with something, a strange, dense liquid that scientists believe is an active, self-sustaining mixture of the ancient bacteria, diesel fuel, and radioactive runoff. The story of Camp Century is the ultimate cautionary tale for the Anthropocene era. It demonstrates that the greatest technological failures are often rooted in a lack of environmental and intergenerational accountability. The actions of a few Cold War planners are now threatening the future of the global ecosystem. The base now stands as a frozen, ticking time bomb, a monument to human arrogance and short-sightedness, a silent reminder that our secrets never truly stay buried. The solution is not to bury our problems, but to confront them. The core question posed by the melting base is simple. Given that the United States created the waste and the failure, should the global community force the US to assume full, immediate responsibility for the $3 billion cleanup, or should the cost be borne by the nations most affected by climate change? We want to know what you think. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one. Camp Century was never built to last. We'll see you next time as we dive deep into another lost future.